A black Portland police officer speaks the truth about racist BLM protesters. Twitter gets hacked. Hold the line against COVID panic. An NYPD chief says cops are handcuffed by politics. And the Trump campaign makes a change. Welcome, my friends, to the Buck Sexton Show. Great to have you here with me, as always. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today as we go through everything that is happening across the country. I wanted to start with some recognitions that I think are finally coming to the forefront. For those who are honest and paying attention and looking at what's really happening in the country, you have a few things. One, the theory out there that we need to have a national lockdown or a series of rolling lockdowns at the national level is completely insane. I've been consistent on this. I'll explain why. But I believe people are starting to recognize this is just a non-planned plan. There's no good explanation for doing this unless it's a very short-term reduction in cases in a very specific area only for the issue of hospital capacity. But we'll return to that later. Not because, oh my gosh, this state has a lot of cases. That's not a good reason to lock down. But also, what has the BLM movement achieved so far? What has been the upside of this movement that was not just supported, but bowed down to by corporate America? What have we gotten from this? How has it made anything better? Some of our major cities are markedly less safe, provably, demonstrably more violent. There's been millions of dollars of property damage. No one can really calculate what's going to happen in some of the neighborhoods in places like Minneapolis that were burned out, looted. How long is that going to last? Are you going to want to buy a home right next to where they just had a BLM protest come through and burn down a CVS or burn out a grocery store? Probably not. So really now, this movement that has been around for a few months, you look at it and say, hold on a minute. What is it doing for us? What is it really all about? Now, I've known where we were heading with this because I remember the last time there was a BLM movement. The media has no institutional memory when it comes to understanding why they were wrong the last time. Right? Whether it's you look at the treatment of Kavanaugh and why we should actually believe in evidence instead of emotion, or you look at the way that they've just completely and utterly debased themselves over the Russia collusion nonsense, never learning any lessons, maybe just some random leak from a former intelligence officer does not in fact mean that Putin was directing Trump in how to steal the last election. They never learn their lessons. I think it's intentional. But also, they're pretty dumb. I mean, most journalists are stupid. Not all. Some are quite bright, but most journalists are pretty dumb. And I've dealt with tons of them at this point now for the last decade. And it's shocking. Unless you've actually spent time around the news media, you really can't get a good feel for, wow, these people are generally ignorant, deeply narcissistic, and wildly political as Democrats. That's the standard that you get from most of them. But Black Lives Matter hasn't done anything yet that any person who is judging this based on results would think is an improvement. If you have a major political group that's out there on the streets, a political movement that's saying, hey, we have the following demands. And some of the demands you might say, I don't necessarily agree, but at least there'd be some improvement from it, right? Something would be better if we did this. Maybe the trade-off isn't worth it. But no, Black Lives Matter has only pushed for things that make everything worse for everyone. But it does, in making things worse, bring down Trump approval rating. It does show power, right? That they can just hold the country hostage to their demands. That they, during a pandemic even, can go out and completely forget about and get a pass on all of the social distancing and mask wearing. And I see people increasingly calling them face diapers, which I think I tend to agree with. that has been happening, and now we're also starting to find out the truth about who's really involved in this movement, who's really pushing this. In the early days, there were a lot of people that lived in. There were a lot of minorities who lived in communities, and this is just based on the video footage you'd see on the news and the leaders of the movement, who would be talking about police violence and police brutality. And that gave a certain credibility, at least, to the movement having some honest feelings behind it. Now, whether you agree with that being widespread honest feelings or not, that's a whole other part of this discussion. But now what you see increasingly are just crazy, bratty white kids running around, 25, 30-year-olds who are running around and acting like maniacs because they have Trump derangement syndrome. And they're using this shield of Black Lives Matter whenever they get, overindulgent, whenever they do too much, they attack cops or whatever it is. Oh, this is about Black Lives Matter. Weren't we all arguing as a country about statues about a week or two ago? What happened to that? Oh, you mean it wasn't really about the statues? It's also not really about the killing of George Floyd, my friends. This movement is not really about any of the things they've told us it's about. It's just find areas that are emotionally volatile, find areas where there's a damage to the national psyche, exploit them, make people angry, give them an outlet for all the rage and all the frustration that we feel because of these unnecessary shutdowns that we've been put through for months now. And you have a great mobilization tool for the Democrat Party, getting the base energized and making everybody else in the country who just wants to go back to life miserable and scared that they're going to say the wrong thing and get fired from their job, that they're going to, go too far with one thing and there'll be a problem. They'll say something online and all of a sudden their business will be boycotted. So what's this movement's ethos, really? Who's pushing it? I said to you, there are a lot of, white liberals, young white liberals who have taken over much of the activity here. And what are they like? Because they tell us that they're anti-racist. And now if you don't sign on for their agenda, you are not, in fact, an anti-racist. You have to do that or else you're kind of complicit in racism. That's the way they structure this. That's the way they set it up. And you have a Portland police officer, Officer Jackson, who gave an interview, and you won't see this on the mainstream news channels. Gave an interview where he explains. Now, this is a black police officer in Portland, Oregon, talking about what it's like to try and deal with these protesters who the media refers to as mostly peaceful, anti-racist, anti-fascist, and all about black lives. Well, here's a black cop telling you what he thinks about these protesters. Play clip 2.
It says something when you're at a Black Lives Matter protest. You have more minorities on the police side than you have in a violent crowd. And you have white people screaming at black officers. You have the biggest nose I've ever seen.
What was it like in that capacity in the first few weeks when the fence was up around the Justice Center?
I got to see folks that really do want change, like the rest of us, that have been impacted by racism. And then I got to see those people get faded out by people that have no idea what racism is all about, never experienced racism. They don't even know that the tactics that they are using are the same tactics that were used against my people. And they don't even know they don't even know the history. They don't know what they're saying. Coming from someone who graduated from PSU with a history degree, it's actually frightening. They say if you don't know your history, you repeat it, and watching people do that to other people.
Here you have a very eloquent black cop in Portland laying out for you something you won't hear on mainstream news channels. You won't see the New York Times writing this up. He is telling you what we all knew was going to happen here, which is that in the beginning, there are people who everyone saw what happened to George Floyd and said, my God, that's terrible. There needs to be accountability. And there will be people in that moment who really do want to address racism, want to look at police brutality, want to have a serious adult conversation about those serious and adult issues. But the left was never interested in that. It was always the ignition point for the exploitation of their own political movement. It was never meant to be a real structural change, not for the apparatus of the Democrat Party and the left. And that's why, as this officer just told you, and he's been all along, Portland has been one of the tremendous hotspots for left-wing, the most aggressive left-wing street protest activism stuff anywhere in the country. Probably the most active Antifa chapter in the whole United States is in Portland. So this cop has been dealing with this for months, and he's saying, you know what this has really turned into? A bunch of mostly white, ignorant, liberal, millennials and Gen Z who are showing up and saying incredibly, truly racist things to a black cop. Real racism, like, Nazi Germany kind of racism stuff to a black cop. And they think they're fighting racism? No. They're just angry morons who have been indoctrinated by the Democrat Party and the media and all these different cultural institutions that are controlled by the left in this country that want to divide us by race, that want to divide us in the most vicious and irreparable ways. He's telling you. And he has more to say. Play clip 3.
A lot of times, someone of color, black, Hispanic, Asian, come up to the fence and directly want to talk to me. Hey, what do you think about George Floyd? What do you think about what happened about this? I go up to the fence, someone white comes up, F the police, don't talk to him. That was the most bizarre thing because I could see it coming. I even had a young African-American girl tell me, why is it you guys aren't talking to us? I said, honestly, this is now the 23rd day of doing it. Every time I try to have a conversation with someone that looks like me, someone white comes up and blocks him and tells him not to talk. And then right when I said that, this white girl popped right in front of her and she said, he just said that was going to happen. I said, straight up. I said, I've been called the N-word. She's been called the N-word. Why are you talking to me this way? Why do you feel that she can't speak for herself to me? Why is it that you feel you need to speak for her when we're having a conversation? Then when you go to a gentrified community, and one of the first pictures I saw one of the business that was looted was a black-owned business. I'm like, they're not even from here. They don't even know what they're even doing.
This interview is a must-watch. Everyone across the country who cares about what's going on now with this Black Lives Matter movement, here you have a black cop who is completely sympathetic to the concerns of the minority community when it comes to actual racism and police-civilian interactions. And that's, as I've said, there are instances of police brutality that are reprehensible, and there should be both accountability and transparency. But that's a very different thing. To say that, 1 out of 10,000 or 50,000 cops is a racist who's going to hurt black or brown people out of some animus is a very different thing than saying cops are racist pigs and we should show them no respect. To the point, which is what the libs are saying, which what the Democrat BLM movement is saying, and to the point where they will have white kids go up to a black cop, as he just said, and use the N-word. I mean, you sit here and you say, how is this even possible? Because for the actual movement and the apparatus of the left, it's not about saving minority lives. It's not even about minority lives that have been lost in the past, George Floyd or others. It is about using points of emotion and division in our society for a broader political mobilization against their opposition, which they view as conservative, right-wing Trump America. That's it. All the other stuff is just a dodge. All the other stuff is a ploy. And unfortunately, it has been a largely successful one. But can you imagine? Listen to what this officer's saying. He says minorities at these protests, black and brown people at the protests, come up to him as a black man and want to have a real conversation about George Floyd. And I can see that. That makes sense. I get that. And you know what I'm sure this cop would say? That was terrible. That doesn't represent what I do or any of my colleagues here do every day. We all reject that. I've heard the entire NYPD from the top to bottom already say that. I'm sure this guy would say the same thing and has said the same thing. But then that would lead to more dialogue, and that would lead to perhaps more people who are concerned from the black and brown community about police violence having a greater understanding of police, and the police having a better line of communication with them, and things would actually improve. No, that's not what the white liberal kids want. No, they want to scream racial epithets at black cops while thinking they're fighting racism. These are all Democrats who are doing this. And I know people say, Buck, why are you making it political? Because it is political. That's all this is. It's not about improving society. It's about power and people thinking they are better than other people because of their beliefs. Black Lives Matter has already collapsed into incoherence and disarray, except as a tool of rage and division, which is what continues to be useful to the Democrat Party. Reform was never about reform. Showing respect to black cops, that you cannot tell me that a person cares about black lives and would, in their first interaction with a black police officer, show not just disrespect to the officer, but disrespect to him on account of his race, and believe that this movement is not intellectually and morally rotten, because it is.
But we have other cities that are out of control. They're like war zones. And if the city isn't going to straighten it out, if local politicians, all in this case, I don't say this for political reasons, they're all Democrats. They're liberal, left-wing Democrats. And it's almost like they think this is going to be this way forever. Where in Chicago, 68 people were shot and 18 died last week. We're not going to put up with that. We're not going to put up with that.
I hope the president's able to take action on this. They should send in additional federal law enforcement to assist. Clearly, the Chicago Police Department is incapable of bringing that violence curve down. If this is really about black lives, as we are told it is, and saving black lives, then the focus should be on where are lives being lost every single day. Not once every 3 to 6 months at the hands of a police officer, but every single day. But once again, the Democrats don't care very much about that, do they? I can't believe we're being evicted from our home that we didn't sell. That's what Deborah said when she learned that she was the victim of home title fraud, a crime that can cost you your home. Title fraud is not covered by insurance or identity theft services. The only folks I trust to protect your home are at Home Title Lock. Your home's legal title is online where cyber thieves can find it and forge your signature stating you sold your home to them. In Deborah's case, she didn't know she was a victim until the eviction notice arrived. Home Title Lock puts a virtual barrier around your home's title. If there's any tampering detected, they will instantly mobilize to stop it. So go to HomeTitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're a victim and don't know it. Use code BUCK for 30 free days of protection. That's code BUCK at HomeTitleLock.com. Oh, but the defund the cops movement hasn't actually really happened yet, they'll say. The budgets may have been changed, but the funding doesn't change for a while. To that, I just want to point out that it's not just about the dollars and cents being taken out of police budgets. It's also about the message that it sends. It's about the message that it sends on the streets to the bad guys, to the cops, who are the ones that have to make those in the heat of the moment, high-risk decisions about what level of force to use, what bad guy to chase down the alleyway or not. How aggressive is their policing going to be against violent felons? Or they're going to say, look, unless we've got no choice, we're just not really going to exert ourselves to enforce the law. And because they don't want to get arrested themselves and put on some kind of a public show trial with people like de Blasio, who are just looking for cops to make examples of all the time. You know, it used to be understood that if a cop was acting in good faith and applying his training properly, you know, it's never a pretty thing. And this is what libs don't want to believe. It's never a pretty thing when you see someone who is fighting a cop to get taken down to the pavement and handcuffed. It doesn't look like, you know, two people in Western Europe having an espresso and having a nice chat. People are going to get hurt. There's going to be some cuts and bruises that happen. This is the day-to-day reality of law enforcement, which is why part of the movement that we should be having, if we're really going to talk about criminal justice reform and discussions, is how to interact with cops. That's actually an important thing to understand. And I know people don't usually talk about this, but every cop that I know, and I've got a cop in my family, I've worked at the NYPD, I mean, I know a lot of cops. They will tell you that when respect is given, respect is reciprocated, and that's just the nature of police-civilian interactions. When disrespect is the first thing that is thrown at the cop, that then shows a mentality that they will often react to more aggressively because, one, they're trying to establish control and some authority in a situation, and two, they want to go home that night. The cop wants to go home to his or her, you know, family. They don't want this. That's another part of the discussion that is never prominent enough. The cops, you know, want to pull their gun and use it on somebody. It's even if they absolutely have no choice but to do that, it's a nightmare. You know, they're going to get investigated. They're going to get put on, you know, on desk duty or just, you know, suspended with pay pending investigation, and you know, they might get sued in civil court. Even it's a nightmare. They do not want to do that. They all know that. There is no jurisdiction in the country where they're like, yeah, you know, just pull the trigger on a guy today. No big deal. You know, it just happens. No, that's not true. But we never get to have a discussion about this the way it is. We have discussions the way the media reflects this. And I mean, the cowards in our mainstream media who would call the cops the instant that they heard some ruffians walking across the backyard of their Hamptons estate. Ooh, good heavens. I hear it sounds like some fraternity brothers are running through the yard for a prank. Call the police, you know. That's who's telling you, yeah, defund the cops. Defund the cops. Sure they are. Police Commissioner Dermot Shea has said that they are going too far now with the politics against the cops. And he said that the anti-cop sentiment, not just anti-police brutality, from the George Floyd protests are being used to further political agendas. Oh, wow. You mean the police commissioner of the biggest police force in the country under a far left Democrat mayor has finally had enough and is like, this is just about hating cops. That's what this is. This is just about hating cops for some people and mobilizing people with that hatred, the masses, the anti-Trump, Trump deranged left, with this as their main point of entry, with this as their rallying cry. And the people that Officer Jackson in Portland mentioned, particularly black and brown individuals who want to have a constructive dialogue with police and want to express their concerns and reservations to cops. And I'm sure some of them have had poor treatment at the hands of police. We know that happens. That, of course, no question. Those voices have been marginalized, pushed aside. This isn't about a constructive dialogue. Come on. Of course not. This is about crazy Wellesley Masters in Gender Studies grads screaming in the face of police officers that they are betraying their people. That's what this is about. That's what you see at these protests, okay? Let's be honest. I've been to them, and I've been doing nothing but watching and covering them. It's insane. So you got the NYPD commissioner telling us what we know, but affirming it. This is about politics, the anti-cop stuff. BLM is not, these protests, they're not making anything better with their Occupy zone in D.C. and the disaster in Seattle where people died because of that. People lost their lives because a bunch of left-wing morons thought that creating a police-free zone was a good idea. And then you have the agenda of the Democrat Party. What are the Democrats? Remember, there's always, it's like, think of it like the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, and Sinn Féin, right? The political arm of the terrorist group. That's how you have to think of elected Democrats in office. So you have the street paramilitaries of Antifa. You have these people that are doing, using violence and coercion and threats and mob mentality to get attention and to push issues. And then the Democrats in elected office in their fancy building in D.C. and wherever else in state capitals across the country, they're supposed to translate this into legislation that benefits the left. So this is just one hand washing the other. This is the 1-2 punch of the Marxists that we see in our own midst. And here's Chuck Schumer coming through today with exactly what you'd expect. This is from Fox News. Quote, Senate Democrats released a $350 billion plan to tackle systemic racism and historic underinvestment in communities of color that have been hit hardest by the coronavirus pandemic and economic downturn. The Economic Justice Act calls for 10 major investments over the next 5 years to help communities of color with child care, health care, jobs programs, infrastructure improvements, and housing assistance. Senate Democrats framed their proposal as a down payment, so it's just a beginning, on calls to address systemic racism and economic disparities that have been spotlighted in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic and death of George Floyd. There's a growing movement underway for Congress to tackle these disparities through slavery reparations to African Americans. This is the Chuck Schumer statement. Long before the pandemic, long before the recession, long before this year's protests, structural inequalities have persisted in healthcare and housing, the economy and education. End quote. Pay off the base, folks. That's what this is. Schumer is this is not going to go through. The Senate Republicans are not going to go along with this, obviously. But this is now where you see what the real game plan is. Now, with people all angry and talking about this and racial tensions at this very high point, Democrats are saying, yeah, you know what we need to do? We just need to write a check from the taxpayer's bank account for $350 billion to tackle systemic racism. Write a check to communities of color and make sure that they come out in full force for Democrats this fall. This is a payoff. When I told you there's this mobilization, this has been the plan all along, right? This is what we knew that Democrats weren't going to be able to do anything to make people safer or tackle police issues in a meaningful way. That was all just a smokescreen. Justice Scalia wrote in an affirmative action decision for the Supreme Court of the racial entitlement state. Senate Democrats are saying we need to just start paying people, giving people more resources based upon skin color. That is what they are saying. This is money for communities of color. We want to shovel money to communities of color. Whatever happened to equal protection under the law? We've gone so far beyond this now. Oh, and even reparations. They're talking about reparations now, which we know will continue to come up here. This is classic quid pro quo power politic. This is the Democrats saying, all right, so the communities of color in this country have been, their issue of police tension has been exploited by the Democrats, predominantly by white liberals all across America. This issue has been exploited, and so now we're just going to say, let's give a lot of money to those communities in the hopes that they will, of course, come out and vote in the highest possible numbers this fall. This is a payoff. This is a payoff. It's what it's all. Now you're seeing what this was all really about. It's not about making people safer on the streets. It's not about stopping police violence. It's about creating the political momentum for Democrats like Pelosi and Schumer to promise to just flood left-wing interests, particularly in communities of color, but to just start writing checks out of your checkbook as the taxpayer to interests and groups that they like. That's always that, and the electoral impact that promise was always what this was about. So now it's all coming together. Now we're seeing it all. As for this as a justice movement, the fraud. And what's also sad is that even if they were to spend whatever this is, $350 billion, you think that the Congress with Democrats leading are going to spend $350 billion and systemic inequality goes away or racism evaporates? No, it's just, as I said, it's a down payment. The next call will be for $500 billion. And then the call after that will be it's just about, this is white liberals atop the Democrat Party finding out ways to stay in power by writing checks as payoffs to constituencies that they have convinced have no other choice in the political system and need to support them and will get paid for their trouble. That's what's going on. And what else are the libs offering other than payoffs to their base with the taxpayers footing the bill? What else are they promising they will do this fall? Well, on the energy proposal from Biden, because remember, climate change and renewable energy, green energy, the Green New Deal, these are points of religious fervor for Democrats. You can't have a normal conversation with them, what makes sense, what doesn't, because we're all going to die unless we listen to Greta Thunberg. Remember that? The same people who tell you they believe in science are like, listen to the 16-year-old high school dropout about how we should spend trillions of dollars of money because of an incredibly complicated scientific issue for which there is neither a crisis nor a cure. So that's how it is. But here you have Trump pointing this out, I think rightly. Play clip 12.
Biden wants to massively re-regulate the energy economy, rejoin the Paris Climate Accord, which would kill our energy totally, and you'd have to close 25% of your businesses and kill oil and gas development. They still haven't explained what they're going to do to power our great plants and factories, but at some point I'm sure they will. We'll learn that from AOC, who's in charge of energy. She's in charge, along with Bernie. It's AOC and Bernie are in charge of energy. I don't think Texas is too happy about that. What do you think? You think we'll call up the governor? Governor Abbott, great governor, will ask, how do you like that, Governor? I didn't want to waste the phone call because I would know how he felt.
Since he's talking about Texas and energy, maybe we should hear from the energy secretary, Texan Rick Perry. Play 7.
Listening to that clip, it reminds me of Joe Biden looking into the camera and telling the NRA that I'm coming after you and I'm going to get all of your guns. He's looking into the eye of the American energy industry and basically saying, I'm coming after you and I'm going to get all of your jobs. Because that far left radical energy agenda that he talks about will be a massive job killer. I mean, hundreds of thousands of jobs in the oil and gas industry and the coal industry. I mean, all across the board. I mean, pipeline companies, the union jobs that are being created out there. If I'm a union guy in the energy industry, I stay away from Joe Biden like he's the plague.
He's telling you the truth, right? That there's going to be enormous job losses, but also just tremendous expense and cost for no benefit other than the ideological benefit that Democrats get from thinking that they're all saving the planet. We're saving the planet. Yeah. Captain Planet. He's the hero. You guys remember that was like, there was actually a superhero. It was not a very good cartoon, but I did used to watch a lot of cartoons as a kid called Captain Planet. He's always fighting against polluters. Wasn't a good cartoon. G.I. Joe was much better. Can't have G.I. Joe anymore. Military, guns. Oh, no, not allowed. Now it's all Teletubbies or whatever's cool now for kids. Rick Perry's telling the truth. This is what's going to happen, but Democrats are okay with that. Think about the way that they have completely justified in their minds the continued, and we're about to talk about lockdown and where we are with all that in the COVID era, but the continued lockdown of the country because it is obviously very bad for Trump if the country is locked down. And even though there's a lot of suffering that will happen because of this, even though there'll be a lot of destroyed, millions of people have jobs lost, businesses destroyed, maybe never come back, bankruptcies are going to surge. We're going to be unraveling a lot of the long-term costs of these lockdowns in the months ahead, no matter what. They're just adding to that tab, as well as the undiagnosed cancer and the health issues and the overdoses, drug overdoses, all these things we see from lockdowns. Democrats are unbothered by all of that because they know that it means Trump is in a weaker position to get reelected. Yeah, and also some of them are terrified of the virus because their own media outlets are constantly telling them that a virus that has a 99.7% general survivability rate and over 80%, I think is what I've seen recently, of people have mild to no symptoms who get it, that we should shut down the country again for. They want a national shutdown. Let's talk about that a little bit. That's an important place to go.